Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
It's still March, and my home river, the Tor, I've got this theory that because it runs off the north face of Dartmoor, it takes some time for the water to warm up. So what we're going to do is see if we can head right up into Dartmoor, see if we can find a fish up there that's going to eat a dry fly. That's the plan anyway. The other reason I wanted to do this is that I get so many messages from people who I guess know that I'm based in Devon asking me about Dartmoor. And I thought it might be really, really cool to let people know a little bit more about setups, what you need, what you really don't need, and try and explain what's happening. The weather is, as has much of March been, is miserable. We've had a hell of a lot of rain. A lot of the rivers have not been fishable. So again, by heading right up the water system, there's a chance that we might get some rising fish and some fishable water as well, more importantly. Looking out the window now, it's dank, it's dark. The raindrops are falling on the windscreen of the car at the moment. They're not heavy, so that's good news. There's heavy rain forecast for a little bit later, but my hope is that we're going to find somewhere that's fishable, and if we're really, really lucky, we might find a fish that's going to come and eat a dry fly. That's going to be pretty cool. I've fished a couple of times at home on, it's kind of upper river, it's club water of the Tor. I've managed to catch a couple of fish on nymphs, and that's been great fun. I've really enjoyed that. I've sort of reverted back away from the Euro techniques and just fitted these New Zealand yarn indicators, cast a nymph. I think part of it is because it's start of season, I want to cast a fly line and fish that way. So that's what I've done. I've been fishing that way, caught some fish, but to be honest, I just thought it might be fun to see if we can make fish rise in what are not the greatest of conditions, but we're going to give it a good go anyway. We've had a proper sportsman's breakfast. Scrambled eggs, sausages, bacon, all that sort of stuff, some good coffee, and we've made the walk in, and the conditions are as we expected. And I always say about Dartmoor that whatever you are lower down, it's usually 3 times more extreme further up, and that certainly seemed the case. We sort of walked in and the wind's screaming in our face. It's got I would say a good 15 plus mile an hour into our face. There's drizzle around. We've got to the river and it's pushing. I think probably when people think about Dartmoor, they think of gently flowing streams. The water's clear, but there's a good push. And I think probably the plan is to fish any pocket, flat bit of water and fish a reasonable size fly. But I'm fishing with my good friend Warren today. We'd been talking about this for ages, and we knew the weather was probably going to be against us, but the idea was just to go out and mark some sort of a start of the season, to tie on a dry fly and to see if we can get someone to come up. I think seeing the river is going to be a relatively big ask, but that's not going to stop us from trying. Warren, it's great to have you back along. That was quite an interesting walk in, wasn't it?
It really was. Great to be out again, Pete. Lovely breakfast, good cup of coffee, as you said. This is, believe it or not, the first time I've been out since Christmas. So it's probably the longest I've ever gone. I'm just working out which end of the rod to hold as we're stood here. But I suppose you can hear the river in the background. And the more and more I look at it, our brief is, we've got quite a task on our hands, put it that way, to try and get one on the dry fly. But it's just lovely to be back out again.
Absolutely. And we're fishing, we decided, if you'd listened to both the John Girac and Ed Engel, and we've talked about bamboo rods, and you know, if you're a regular listener, that we're both fans of them, and we're fishing some bamboo. We're just trying to enjoy every aspect of what today brings. I think there's some pretty heavy rain coming in later this afternoon, but that doesn't matter. What have you tied on? Warren is I should say, and if you look at his Instagram and Facebook, you'll see he's a wonderful fly tyer. What are you going to tie on?
I've already tied an Adams on. It just felt right. Bamboo and Adams. What better way of combination for the opening cast? What is the opening cast of my season anyway? It looks a little bit small, if I'm being honest. So we may swap that out for something a bit larger. But it's got to have plenty of floatability by the looks of it today.
And that's a good point about the size of the fly. Up here, the fish just get, because the pools are so small, the fish get a really short time to see it. And are they going to come up? Water temperatures, obviously, it's March. It's not going to be, water's not going to have any warmth to it whatsoever. So we've got to give them something that's worth their while to come and have a look at. So I'm probably going to be fishing a stimulator or a big caddis pattern that sits nicely in the water, floats nice and high, but has got a big enough footprint that the fish are able to see it. Sort of looking upstream, and there's plenty of white water on the river at the moment. So it is going to be just a case of looking for any flatter parts. It's easy to be deceived here though as well, because the water is dropping quite fast here, so it probably looks slightly more extreme than it may do further up. So again, that's going to be the plan. We'll see how we get on. We fished the first few pools and we're starting to formulate a strategy, and with the push of the water, 2 or 3 casts in what looks like could be a holding spot for a fish, and we give it a go. I don't want to sort of talk about the wind, but I just fished a little pool and high sticked, and the wind just blew the fly along and skittered it across the top. And I'm sure in summertime that would be deeply appealing and interesting for a trout, but nothing as yet. But it's a fascinating challenge, isn't it?
It really is, yeah. The wind seems to be picking up. Like I briefly touched on earlier, let's be honest, our brief of bamboo and dry fly, we were never gonna deviate from that plan, no matter what the weather threw at us. But a lot of people would be questioning our tactics at the moment, I think. But for me, that makes it all the more fun. We'd made our mind up. That's what we were going to do, and we're going to stick to it. So let's keep going and see what it brings.
And Warren's dead right that we could probably hang a nymph on and it may work, but I still think there's a chance in here. We've got to find someone who's willing to play. And already I've talked about going up a size in fly. I'm probably going to go up bigger again, and I've got some mayfly type patterns that I bought in the winter ready for summertime. And that's one of the cool things about fishing on Dartmoor, that you throw the rule book out the window. You can do that, and what I'm working on the basis, as I said previously, is just to put something big on and see if we can get a fish to come up and eat it. That will be the thrill. The downside of that probably is that the fish aren't particularly big here. So if I've got a size 12 or a 10 or whatever it may be, there's a chance that's going to be too chunky for the fish anyway. But I'm going to try anyway, just to see if I can bring someone up. And when something like that happens, it sort of feels you, not that I don't feel overawed by the situation or the fishing conditions or anything else, but I want to see if the strategy that we're planning on, sticking with the dry flies, whether it's going to work up here in these quite interesting conditions. I've got this great big mayfly pattern on, and what I'm also trying to do to see if I can bring someone up is, again, like I said about throwing the rule book out the window, I'm trying to slap the fly down hard to see if that attracts anyone. It's a great big morsel for them to eat. So I'm trying to throw that down. It does seem like the back eddies and flat, soft water. That's what we're looking for at the moment. Anything like that to try and land a fly in and see if anyone's home. We're sort of leapfrogging each other at the moment, but sort of keeping half an eye out. I don't know if conditions. I'm told this might be an easterly as well. I'm not sort of making excuses. I still have every hope and faith that we might get someone come and have a look at the fly, and we'll just keep working up. Is it fun? Yes. We're the only two maniacs out in these conditions at the moment. And talking about conditions, I should talk about also when you're fishing up here as well, and phone signal can be a little bit sketchy, and it may be worth, if you are coming up on your own, letting someone know where you're going, where you're heading to, roughly what time you might be back, just in case. And the reason I say that as well is that I like fishing. When I'm fishing Dartmoor, I want to fish something that's different to the lowland stream. So I always head up as high as I possibly can, because I am a pocket water addict as well. I love fishing that sort of water, and it's different, it's fast, and like I've been saying, the rules are different up here. But what you get as a result of that, as remnants, I guess, of post-ice age spates or massive flows. It's quite an uneven terrain, and it's the sort of place, if you're not careful, you could easily turn an ankle. So you need to be really, really careful about that. The other thing to bear in mind as well is that Dartmoor is pretty much a sponge. So the rain falls in here. Yes, if there's showers and rain like there is right now, then that's going to impact water heights. But it's a boggy area. So take care where you're stepping as well, because some of it you can sink. So if it looks sort of lighter green and there's water around it, just don't step in that. Find an easier way around and go from there. But those things are certainly worth bearing in mind if you're going to come up here. The river here is pretty thin. It's probably about 10, 15 feet across, and it cascades down between and around boulders. It reminds me of a piece I wrote several years ago about describing the rocks, and how one of the rocks I described as it was a suitcase that had been thrown by a lazy baggage handler. And that sort of gives you an idea. I'm watching Warren Fisher Pool now at the moment, and he's working the far side of the pool with the flat water. And I remember actually one time I was up here, in normal conditions it's a great pool, and I remember missing a sizable trout, certainly by Dartmoor standards, on that far side. So, and in those conditions you could easily just walk up the river that side, but we're generally not getting in, and that's not a bad idea for Dartmoor. The less you can disturb the fish, the better. And they very often have that domino effect that if one's spooked, that they will all, you'll see them just shoot up the pool and hide away under the rocks. That's what they tend to do. So you don't want to make a whole load of casts. I always make 2 or 3 casts, and in these conditions I'm just picking where I think the fish might hang out, fishing there. If I don't get a take in 1 or 2 casts, I'm gone, and then I'm looking for the next flatter bit of water and going from there. But always work the water, but quickly. Don't sit on a pool like you may do in other situations. So just keep travelling. You've got so much water to play with. Just keep travelling the whole time. So even now we look at signs of moral victory, and Warren's stuck with his parachute. Adam still, or is it Royal Wolf? He's got a coachman. Coachman on at the moment. But almost some positive news. Do you think?
I think so. I'm pretty sure, as sure as I can be, that I saw a fish behind the fly, a couple of pulls back. That's enough to keep us going anyway. I think it certainly is for me. I think half the battle here is getting the fly where you want it. I think we've just had a discussion. There's no fear of drag or what your cast looks like. It's purely a matter of getting your fly where you want it out, whichever way you can really in this wind. But it's just great fun, proper extreme, I think. Yeah.
We've walked up further and we're right into the moors now. The river's changed character a little bit more, and rather than being rocky, it's a little bit more freer flowing. The pools aren't as clearly as defined. The wind has become, because we're not sort of in a valley so much now, the wind's being more of a issue. So these are the moments you've got to adapt and think about, right, how do I get my fly across? And you have to adapt how you cast it. I'm even looking at downstream presentations as well. Drag isn't an issue up here, but it's just a case of I think it's one of those days where we've probably got to try and land a fly over a fish who says, yeah, this might be for me. But I don't know if you get a sense. I've got the mic is covered really, really well, but I don't know if you're getting a sense of the wind, but it's certainly picked up some more. It's probably 20, 30 mile an hour now. So it does make the casting challenging, but that's part of for me at least, the charm of Dartmoor, and you've got to think about it. We're still remaining extremely optimistic that there's a chance that somebody may come out and play. If anything, the clouds lifted a little bit, yet the rain has been persistent. It's just not stopped. It's not heavy, but it's just sort of, I guess, what you'd call moors weather, really. And we're just looking for anywhere. Warren's just fished it's a run where the pool widens a little bit, so it may be 15 plus feet across, and there's a big back eddy, flat, and there's a very defined bubble line, and he's landing his fly expertly in there, given the conditions as well, and seeing if anyone wants to come and have a look. But it's sort of kind of got that feel that the fish aren't in feeding positions. That's how it looks. As I said, we could try and hang a nymph on, but that's not what that's about. I think if these conditions, and I'll throw it to Warren, I think this might be one of those brinkmanship moments where we just stick it out and see. But I'm going to throw to Warren that perhaps it may be worth looking down the river a little bit. It may be fishable, it may not. So there's an element of risk in that. But that's one of the great things about Dartmoor, or Devon, the amount of fishing that there actually is, that we may be able to change things up a little bit and perhaps, just maybe, find a fish that wants to play with us, but we'll wait and see. One of the questions I'm often asked is, I'm heading down to Dartmoor, what rod do I need? And to be honest, there's no rules. It doesn't matter. Modern convention probably says a slightly longer, lighter rod, so a 9-foot, 2, 3 or 4, even a 10-footer. And the reason for that is that you can control the line on the water a little bit better. It may help you fish some of those pockets a little bit more easier. But to be honest, it doesn't matter. What's the difference in line weight between a 3 and a 4? It's negligible. It's not going to change anything to any meaningful way. So I wouldn't get too hung up about that sort of stuff. And today, Warren's fishing, I think, a 7-foot rod. I'm fishing a 7'9". Do I feel at a disadvantage? The water's big, but I don't, not in the slightest. I've got a full weight line on. And we're only fishing a really short line. I think that's the key to a lot of this. If you've got a rod that you can sort of make work a very short distance, then that's probably the key. And there's a big clue there that I don't think that you need to make great long casts. If you're sort of ripping loads of line off your reel and trying to cast up a pool, you're probably going to spook the fish. And it's hard to control a cast when the river's so narrow as well. So you may sort of step in one place, make a cast, and then step up, and the river may be a little bit narrower, there may be a rock that you get caught on, stuff like that. So keep your line short, keep it relatively fixed, and make the movements by stepping up the pools yourself. I think you'll get better success that way. And then think about your approach. You may want to crawl along the bank, but I'm never needed to do that. I'm just wary of, if I get in the water, what impact does that have? Can I still make the cast? I keep my profile low as well. So I'm thinking about all those sorts of things. But yeah, you don't need to throw a long distance. Flies as well, you just don't need masses. The river's so acidic here, you get hatches, but not to the degree that the fish are going to come, that's not got enough turns on the hackle or whatever it is. It's not like that at all. What you've got to do is get your fly into the pool without spooking the fish. If you do that, you're in with a really good chance, and they're not too picky. Over the years, I've seen fish move 4 or 5 feet to take a fly quickly. And that's what will happen in these pools, that if your fly's landed, it hasn't spooked the fish, and they're feeding, or they're in the mood to feed, and usually they are. We're looking at a pretty extreme example of it right now, that the weather is absolutely horrific, but if they're in feeding mode and you haven't spooked them and it looks like food, they're going to give it the time of day. The thing to prepare is the take, and they're lightning quick. So every cast that you make, and that fly lands on the water and you think it's been in a good cast and it's in a good spot, expect to take. That way, that if it happens, you're not going to be super surprised if a fish comes up and takes it. That would be the best advice about that. But the fly pattern, what rod you use, really doesn't matter that much. Fish with what you're most comfortable with. But we've talked about the wind today as well, and while I'm talking about these sort of aspects of it, thinking about how to approach the wind. Now, the wind has been a big downstream at us, and it's been quite a handful. How do we overcome that? Well, we're not making big, long casts. And what you can do as well is shorten your leader. Again, fish aren't super leader shy unless it's sort of summer and the water's incredibly low, but they're really not. And I've been in conditions in the summer where the wind's been howling. It's been almost like a dust bowl, that we fished a 4-foot leader because that was the only way we could turn over the fly, and caught fish that way. I remember it was a beetle pattern. I remember exactly where I was on Cherry Brook, and we made that change and we caught fish. It had zero impact. And I think a lot of that is because we're not casting those great long distances up the pools. So it's a really short presentation. So really the fish is seeing a bit of leader and the fly really. So I don't think it matters too much. So if you're worrying about the wind and you can't turn it over, shorten your leader. The other thing is to change your attack of presentation. So you could either move slightly to the right or left. That may mean that you're not casting directly into the wind. And the other thing that you can do is change. You could side cast and keep your rod very, very flat to the water. So the wind won't be able to affect it in quite the same way. But if there is, and sometimes there are bushes, brambles, or all sorts of things that want to snag your fly, and you do have to go overhead, what you want to do is stop your back cast higher. So have the rod in a more upright position and then deliver the forward cast flatter. And that will allow you to turn that fly over. The key thing really is if the wind's blowing, not let it put you off. Just think, right, how do I overcome it? And funnily enough, today, and if you're a regular listener to the podcast, you'll probably or may have listened to the one in Patagonia, and that was amazing for me. And the wind never really bothers me, but having to deal with extreme wind conditions, and we are really, for the UK, from a fishing point of view, as fly anglers, it's mad conditions at the moment, but it didn't bother me, and it's the same here. I don't think about that as a problem to overcome. So if you're in that right sort of mindset, then it's not going to spoil your fishing. So just think about how you can make it easier and how you can adapt things just to put the odds more in your favour. But these fish, like I say, are an extreme example, and when they're really on the feed, drag at the end of the pool, they don't mind that. Some of them sit right on the lip of the pool, the trout, as the fly tumbles down. You think, oh, there's no chance here, it's dragging like mad, and people have lifted off. I remember when I've been guiding them, and they lift off and they miss the swirl as the fish try to hit it. So don't worry too much about drag. A little twitch as well. If you're in flat water and you think they're on the feed, don't be afraid to twitch the fly as well. That can bring them into play. But generally, they are aggressive little fish. They're some of the most aggressive trout that I've ever fished for. And if you land it in the right place without spooking them, you got a pretty good chance. Played out, it was kind of a brinkmanship thing, and we both didn't want to leave, but I think it was clear in our faces that the wind, the conditions, everything else was a bit much, Bud, wasn't it?
It was. I think it went from eccentric to sort of madness to utter lunacy with the wind, really. I don't think there was any way. It got where we couldn't get a fly in near the water, let alone in it. So yeah, we made the right choice, and what a choice it was. Yeah, beautiful bit of stream. Sorry, Pete.
So what we decided to do is we jumped in the car and headed downstream a little bit. And we're still in Dartmoor, and the river here was sheltered from the wind. The river's still high up the system here, so it's running clear. There is a push to it. The strategy was the same. Warren jumped in first, actually, and said, well, it's a lot clearer. The fish should see it. So we lengthened the tippet just a tiny bit, and we've just been taking it in turns fishing pools. The strategy, like I said, has been exactly the same, that we've been looking for flatter water, anything that's flatter that a fish can sit in. And I've been still fishing this great big caddis pattern, and interestingly down here, with the wind not playing such an impact, the miserly rain is still about, but we've been taking it in turns, and I've still got that big caddis pattern on. It's a great big thing, working on the basis of, you know, something big to bring them up. We have seen some hatch, we've seen some midges, we've seen some stoneflies. That was encouraging, and things like that really do lift your spirits when the fishing's pretty tricky. And we got to a pool, and it happened to be my turn, and we were talking about how it felt exactly the right spot. And the river here is similar sort of width, but as I said, it's a much bigger shaded with tree-lined river here. So you do feel as though the conditions aren't really playing into the fish's behaviour. That having been said, it is still cold, and I've only got thin trousers under my waders, and I can feel how cold the water actually is. That having been said, somebody came and gave my fly the time of day, which I'm absolutely thrilled about. Beautiful, beautiful Dartmoor trout. And the thing about Dartmoor trout is how different they all look as well. Some of them can be dark as anything, some of them buttery, some of them beautiful iridescent red spots. This one was an absolute beauty. And the pool, as I look upstream at where I had the fish, there's a good size rock, perhaps we will call that like the baggage handler's suitcase size, thrown into the middle of the river. And what that does is push the flow to, as I look upstream to the right, and then towards the left, and it leaves a flat bit of water in between. And landing the fly in there, somebody came and gave it the time of the day, and I'm thrilled that, for me, my dry fly season's underway. Warren's been fishing the Adams and really enjoyed that. And we went through one of those conversations that we saw a slightly deeper pool. Should we put on a nymph below the dry? And we thought, sod it, no, we're going to stick with exactly what we've got, and we'll keep going. And I'm really thrilled that that's been the case. Now I want my buddy to be able to catch one as well. You've changed your flies up, pal. What have you put on now? I've
gone back to I suppose you'd call it a stimulator sort of cad. It is a stimulator, but it's a scaled down one. It's about a 12. It's just got much more floatability, really, if I'm being honest. It's not going to go under in this rougher water. But yeah, we'll give it a go.
And the interesting thing is that we talked about, and often on here talk about mindset when you're fishing. And, you know, I'm just brushing a midge away from me now as we speak. When you're seeing bugs and things, that does sort of, you know, like you said and rightly and beautifully described, that we'd gone from ridiculous conditions to somewhere where you felt like you were in with a little bit of a shout. And that's been great. And that thing of seeing a little bit of hatch and being a little bit shaded, calling those changes is sort of, it makes your mindset change all of a sudden, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think the main thing is, as always, once you see a bit of life on the water, or you feel a bit more comfortable, you start fishing. You're watching your fly more intently. You're expecting something to happen. Where the wind was blowing up there, and really it all felt like we were going through the motions for the last 20 minutes or so, and we looked at each other and called it. But now we're back on it again now. So I'm really, you're back on concentrating on the fly, pinging it in every little pocket you can see, especially now you've had one. That's it, we're up and running, and we're fully expecting the fly to get taken.
Absolutely, and I'm sure you're like me, that you're going to be sitting listening to this with your fingers crossed for Warren, like I am. So if you've got your fingers tightly crossed for Warren, we're in a wonderful spot now. On our bank there is some lovely flat water. It just screams fish. I think if he doesn't get one from here, there's nobody home, or nobody eating at least. It looks perfect. So we've got a flow coming down the middle, and then there's a section about 4 or 5 feet wide of pretty even, flat water at the moment, and it looks just right. Like I say, I think if nobody comes up and eats this, there's just nobody home. There's no other story to this, but it just looks perfect. Warren's still got that high flying or high sitting stimulator pattern on at the moment. You can see its wing looks like a sail on the water. It looks absolutely perfect. It's saying eat me. Perhaps it does replicate the stonefly. I think salmon fly is what the pattern was originally tied for, if I remember rightly. But it looks absolutely fantastic. But he's sort of slowly putting casts into this pool and making a few drifts, but it doesn't look like there's anyone home. It's the reason I put this on, because I really felt there was going to be somebody home here. There's 2 really nice pools. There's a pool just above this as well, but this one looks right, and probably in even perhaps 2 or 3 weeks' time, a month's time, I would be expecting to catch fish here easily. And that's one of the things about early season fishing, certainly that I've encountered over the many years in the West Country. There's sometimes you think there's a nailed on fish, but still they're not ready to rise. And it's always worth bearing in mind, they don't know it's the start of the season. They're just doing what they need to do. And if they're not in the mood to eat, or there's no stimulus or enough stimulus for them to want to eat, well, they're not going to eat. But he's fished this beautifully, he's covered the pool beautifully, but it looks like there's nobody home there. So have you still got your fingers crossed? I think you can uncross them now. Warren put a great shot into the seam of some pocket water. It's gone for a steward's inquiry though. I'm perfectly happy with it. But nice work, my friend. You're not 100%, are you?
No, I'm not. I'm to be honest with you, I'm not counting that today. No, it was the first fish on a dry fly of the season. It was on for a fair bit. I'm questioning whether it took the submerged dry or not. So that's where I'm out to vote on that one. But thank you very much for giving it to me. I'm probably not going to take it.
I think he deserves it. Basically, what happened was that the fly went into a pocket, sunk a tiny bit, and I would only say a tiny bit. I would call it damp. I'd still probably call it a dry fly, and a fish ate it, and we saw it was, came in. And as often happens with these fish, they're not big, and that's one thing I should mention about Dartmoor fish. Don't feel you're going to catch 3-pound fish. Certainly when you're high up in the system, there are stories of bigger fish coming around, the sea trout coming into the rivers as well. So, sometimes some magic might happen. But generally, the fish you're going to catch, I would generally say anything over 12 inches is a great fish. But what happens is these things, I've said that how aggressive they are, and also they fight dirty, and they bounce around, jump around, and everything else. And very often they'll come off. But I'm happy to count that from Warren. But I think he'd like to go to the steward's inquiry about that one. We carried on fishing. We've waded up. It feels, and I checked the gauges, that the rivers has come up a little bit. I managed to, a similar sort of case, it was the fish took the fly on the surface, jumped around, it was on for a bit, and as I was bringing it in, came off, which is perfect because it's going back. I don't generally bother with a net up here because of that happening, and also I just sort of slip the hook out and off it goes. And that's fine. And then in the same spot, the same pool, probably 2 foot further up, I had another fish come for the dry. But we've had to grind them out, but it's been pleasing from that point of view. And what many may feel or think that is a fruitless exercise hasn't turned out that way. And it's been nice to sort of fish somewhere different, somewhere less aggressive, I haven't played this back. I never really edit the podcast, so it'll come out exactly as it's happened. I'm thrilled we caught some fish, but it's not been about that. It's been about going out. I've smoked a cigar. Warren's had his pipe. We've had a pasty. Put the world to rights, just sitting on a log with the sound of the river as the background. And that to me is what it's about. You can count it in, fish if you want to, but I think we've done a wonderful job given the conditions as well. And like I said, this is March still. It's funny, and I was saying to Warren, he said, well, where do you think this really fish is? And I think probably with 6-8 inches less water, it would look a completely different place. And it's often the case in many of the streams in Devon, when you're fishing this time of year, you could think there's no fish in the river. You really could. And then all of a sudden the light goes on and the fish suddenly appear, and you think, where have they been? It may be they're sitting in deeper pools doing nothing else. And we've been, the last bit that we fished, and we've walked some way, we've got to bushwhack our way back to try and find a path to get back to where the cars are. And that's part of it as well. That, for me, is what part of fishing around the Dartmoor area is about, that it's a true wilderness, and I love it. It's one of the reasons I live where I do, and these streams mean so much to me, and being able to fish them, enjoy them, and show them to a friend. And this is only your second trip up onto Dartmoor, really, isn't it?
It is, and I think you nailed it there. I mean, we've been clambering over boulders, hanging onto trees, pushing our way up through the river, and I don't get to experience that down my way. And it's just wonderful to do it. It's completely different to the waters I'm used to fishing, and that's why it's nice. And we've had this conversation. We stuck out with the dry fly today, and we've had conversations I know you have on your podcast before, but sometimes it's just nice to do. You may know it's not possibly the method or what you should be doing, but it just feels nice to do something that puts a smile on your face, and that's what the bamboo and dry fly does for me. So I'd rather, I'm wonderfully happy to walk away without any fish, to be honest. We've seen a couple of fish, but this is great. It's been a great day. Thank you.
And I'm still going to count yours, so there we go anyway. And it's my bloody podcast, so there we go. But it's been fantastic. What do you, as somebody who's only fished up here a couple of times, what do you take away from your fishing here from approach? You fish the streams of Hampshire and Wiltshire, which are a different ball game altogether. But what is it that you take away from fishing this sort of water? Because listeners, what I've tried to do with this podcast is give them a bit of information and insight into, perhaps it doesn't need to be an overthought process, but what is it that you've walked away from today from how you fish the water, comparable to the way many people might fish a normal stream?
I think exactly that. I mean, I think I overthought it. I mean, that's definitely what I have done today. Dropping it in spots that you wouldn't usually drop it in, drop your fly in, should I say. And a couple of times I've pinged over the same line and drifted again, and you've said to me, if they were going to take, they'll take straight away. So I think that's the main difference, just to keep moving. We've kept moving, haven't we, all day, clambering and all over all sorts of terrain, and we just kept going, just popping the fly in every single place that you may think there's something there. But instead of, I think if I'd have come here on my own, I think without knowing anything, I think you would possibly walk past water that we've popped flies in today and found fish in a couple of places. So I think that's the main difference, yeah.
And that's a wonderful insight from Warren as well. And one of the things I was saying was, even if you're up here and you see where you think a fish might hold, whether there's a break, a crease or a seam, no matter how small, and I really can't emphasize that enough, that if it is 6, 8, 10 inches, you'd be surprised. And let your fly, if you're fishing high up where I like to, and it's drifting right off the pot there into the next water, let it go all the way down, because very often those fish will sit right at the very back and come out of nowhere. And as Warren says, fish the water, prospect the water, and every cast that you make, expect to be whacked, because then you're ready. They're so fast, so every one, and it can be mentally fatiguing as well, because you're thinking the whole time, right here, there, yep, that's the shot, that's the shot, that's the shot, and go there. You don't need to, as I've said before, pull a load of line off your reel, keep the line fixed, and then move yourself to make that cast and do that. Think that the fish are incredibly spooky. If your flies run down in this sort of water, they're going to hit it pretty quickly. If not, it's highly unlikely you cover it 6 times and they're going to take it again. So that's what I would take from that. I think you've got something you wanted to add.
I think the other thing is fly patterns themselves, really. I mean, I've messed about with a couple of flies today that really weren't suited to the water. I've had a look at what you've been fishing, and I've put a similar, quite a hefty fly, let's be honest, quite a sizable fly, really buoyant flies. And that's been something I probably wouldn't have done without talking to you as well. Shortened leaders as well, possibly. So you're not. There's no graceful airy fairy cast here. It's all crashing it in where you need to get the fly, and then lifting it off the water again. So yeah, that's something else I've noticed today.
There's some great points there, and that's it. I think if you do come fish here, and I can't recommend it enough. That you do throw the rule book out the window. Don't overthink it. Flip it in the pocket. Give the fish a chance to see it. If it eats it, it'll eat it. If it's not going to eat it. Move on to the next spot. Keep moving. But the most important thing is enjoy it. So I think we're going to make the long walk back now. Thank you so much for listening to the Fly Culture podcast. As I said, these aren't carefully put together. We didn't know what's going to happen. We've not added bits in. We've not made stuff up. It's exactly as this has happened today. It's been a tough day, but it's still been an enjoyable one nonetheless. And I think just standing in a river with the water pushing against your legs is pretty cool. And to see some fish come and eat your fly, I think it's been one of those days where it's just had to land right on a fish in the right spot, and it said, yeah, okay. And there haven't been enough of those today. It hasn't felt as though they've really been in feeding positions, but you know what? It doesn't matter. And I'm just watching a rock now, and it looks as though the river's starting to come up a little bit now. So I think we've made the right choice, and we've had a great day. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and if you're considering fishing Dartmoor, this has been a source of inspiration, but also a source of information. So thank you so much, as always, for listening to the Fly Culture podcast.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.